Okay. Okay, the first important challenge with these types of meetings is to find the unmute button. That is very helpful to start talking to each other globally. So, distinguished participants, data experts, users, and producers, ladies and gentlemen, my staff has written a very nice speech for me, a very nice director's speech. But my staff also knows that I'm not very good at reading. So let me deviate right at the beginning and say distinguished professional friends. Because when Francesca Groom asked me, will you be able to be with us at the opening? I said, hell yes, because I have worked with this community and I think this gender statistics and data community, I've learned two things: that apart from the many substantive elements, that they are very dedicated, very substantive, and very passionate. So I would not want to miss to be with you at this opening of the 8th Global Forum on Gender Statistics. So it is truly an honor and a pleasure for me to welcome everybody here around the world, around this virtual table. It would be nice to be around a real table, but it is what it is. And I'm very pleased to address you as a very distinguished group of high-level experts on gender equality and, of course, gender statistics. As we gather here virtually, the most important thing is I hope everything is fine with you and your loved ones around the world during these difficult times. Let me first start by a big thank you. A thank you to my panel partner and partner in so many other crimes, the government of Switzerland, and here in particular, the Federal Statistical Office, George and Katja, who have worked tirelessly to co-organize this with us and bring this to you and today. Also, we found a wonderful partner in the Federal Office for Gender Equality. We have here Sylvie and Capucine representing the many others, and it takes a big team to put an event like this one together. So thank you for your incredible support over the last month and helping us to put this United Nations Global Forum together. This Gender Statistics Forum is organized every 2 years, and this is the 8th one. And it has truly evolved around the world as the leading event to discuss data and evidence to inform gender policies and gender research questions. Thanks to the forum being virtual, we managed to reach out to a broader community of data users and producers. And in total, we may expect over the course of the next days 650 people registered so far to participate. So it's not all bad. I mean, virtual also has its positive aspects. So I welcome all of those who may be here for the first time. If you are here for the first time at the Gender Forum and you're looking to learning more about gender data and how to construct them and how to use them and why they matter, rest assured you are in exactly the right place, and fasten your seat belts, because over the next 2 days, with the theme Building Forward Fairer with Gender Data at the Center, we have a star lineup of panelists that will discuss many issues, but focus in particular on the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. What has it meant for our professional community? What has it meant for gender equality, for measuring gender statistics? What has changed, the good and the bad? And highlighting how we can move forward from here. We will take stock of best practices, and that's the beauty about the United Nations. We have not much power, but we do have one power, and that's the convening power. We can put a table in the middle of the room and invite everybody to come together and share their knowledge and experience so that we don't have to reinvent a wheel and the wheel, and we feel around the world as a strong professional community of solidarity. So we will look at the many aspects of gender statistics, including unpaid work, violence against women, intersecting inequalities from a gender lens, current practices in terms of gender data innovations, integration, communication, informing policy processes, and very important for me as a manager, mobilizing sustainable resources for gender data around the world. Dear colleagues, let me restate our United Nations Statistics Division's firm commitment to leading the development of gender statistics and monitoring progress towards gender equality globally. Uh, We have done so since the early 1980s. And how have we done this? Well, let me give you a short list here. Number one, our normative work. We're setting standards for better gender data, including on measuring time, use, and unpaid work. By setting standards, we develop the language that we can speak to each other around the world, exchange our experiences. Second, our capacity building efforts. We are collaborating with many of you at the national level to strengthen the gender statistics and gender data architecture. Three, our flagship publication, The World's Women, which has provided solid and objective evidence on the status of women compared to men worldwide every 5 years since 1991. And we've just issued the last very innovative, colorful, and substantive publication recently. Fourth, our gender data and indicators platforms that we have collected from around the world and evolved over time, and we will soon update it, and it will be available in a new centralized UN gender data portal, a fully geospatially enabled system. And lastly, but not certainly not least, through our role as the Secretariat of the Interagency and Expert Group on Gender Statistics, the IAEGS. We at the UN love our acronyms. Has been created in 2006. So I'm very proud of this particular group, of this established community of experts who has been working together for more than a decade now, 15 years, to improve the availability, the quality, and usability of gender statistics and ensuring proper coordination and collaboration across many actors and across the world in the cross-cutting themes and components of our gender statistics program. I may not be able to follow all of your substantive sessions, and one of the nice reasons why this is not the case is because I'm going to hop on a plane very soon and actually join my friends in Switzerland for the forthcoming World Data Forum, where we will talk about many topics and about ecosystem integration of data and innovation. But I'm very happy that you, the gender statistics community, goes first and starts talking about all of those topics as an integral part of the global and broad data landscape from a gender perspective. This is absolutely the appropriate first step to start our World Data Forum. So I'm very honored here at the statistics community to serve you, this global statistical community, as we embrace all of these challenges coming out of the COVID pandemic of modernizing our data systems, our data architectures, of innovating, of integrating. This is a very important topic to me. All of the sectoral statistics have to be integrated to better understand the complex world around us. And gender statistics is a great integrator because everything has a gender perspective. And we are very happy that that the pandemic, the crisis, is also an opportunity because it has brought many data partners together. It has created what we like to refer to now a new ecosystem of data. And many of you in the room come from different places, but you are bringing your knowledge, your wisdom, your enthusiasm, and your dedication to the topics of development in general and development of gender and equality and gender statistics in particular to this table. So thank you to all of you at the national and the regional and the international level. We are looking forward to spending this time with you, but also beyond this event, keep working with you on the advancement of gender statistics as part of the many policy agendas that we have, the 2030 agenda, but many other policy agenda. All policy agendas benefit from improved gender data architecture. So I wish you fruitful and interesting discussions. Enjoy this, enjoy the insights and the discussions, but also simply enjoy the professional community. Thank you for this opportunity to opening this event. And I think I'm turning over to my dear friend George from Switzerland.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Stefan, for these kind words. And I would also like to say hello to everybody here, so distinguished. I would also say professional friends, dear Francesca and Stefan, of course, Sylvie, Cappuccini, and Katja, dear gender statistic experts, ladies and gentlemen. And so I think I have mentioned everybody's here in this very important conference. On behalf of the Federal Statistical Office of Switzerland and its management board, I would like to welcome you to the 8th Global Forum on Gender Statistics, planned to be held in Bern in October 2020 and now taking place online a year later. As you probably know, this forum is the second event of the so-called Gender Week, together with the meeting of the UNEC group of experts on gender statistics occurred on Tuesday and Wednesday. And it is also the last event on the so-called Road to Bern series, taking place right before the third United Nations World Data Forum that Stefan just mentioned, to be held in Bern next week in a hybrid format and hosted by the government of Switzerland. The Swiss government and the FSO are honored to be co-organizer of these important discussions on gender statistics among experts and stakeholders, which will be continued at the UN World Data Forum and of course also beyond. Let me start with some general remarks on the way towards modernization that the Federal Statistical Office in Switzerland has undertaken since a few years. In fact, in addition to the traditional core business of statistics production, the Federal Council of Switzerland has assigned us two new tasks. First is data management, and the second is data science. I shortly explain you what is meant by this. With reference to data management, the aim is to establish a data ecosystem for whole Switzerland, in which the data of the federal administration are interoperable, easy to find, and accessible, so that they can be better used. Further, the multiple collections of same content from individual companies and administration can also be avoided. Secondly, the aim of the new established competence center for data science is to solve complex, unstructured, and data-rich problems by applying data science methods, techniques, and practices. For example, the era of machine learning or, for example, artificial intelligence. The point here is to develop skills, talents, and above all, to generate value added in the cooperation with partners. Because we cannot do that by our own and by ourselves. We need to work together with other partners. To put it like the title of our long-standing publication in the thematic area of gender statistics, On the Way to Gender Equality, FSO is on its way to become a center of excellence in data production, data management, and data science. These developments are relevant also for gender statistics, a subject on which the FSO has been working for several years. The first report on disadvantages of women in some areas of life was published more than 30 years ago, in 1988. Since more than 20 years, the FSO has established statistics on gender equality and disseminated data, indicators, and reports on the topic. So the year 2021 is a special year for the FSO in two respects. First, the data and statistics are on everyone's lips. I mean, of course, since the pandemic, it's always here, omnipresent, not only because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which showed how important reliable data are and how momentous of data gaps can be, but also because, as mentioned before, Switzerland is hosting the United Nations World Data Forum. And since 2020, numerous Roads to Bern events have been leading to the World Data Forum in preparation for it. And secondly, it is a special year because in Switzerland, we celebrate 4 anniversaries related to gender equality. It's 50 years since the introduction of women's voting rights. As you know, Switzerland took a bit longer time. 40 years since the principle of equal rights for women and men was enshrined in the Swiss Constitution, and 30 years since the first women's strikes, and 25 years since the entire into force of the Gender Equality Act. So for Switzerland, there can hardly be a better opportunity than this year to discuss at national and international level the modernization of public statistics and data availability in relation to gender equality issues. For that purpose, 2 weeks ago, FSO invited data users and data producers to a roundtable on open government data concerning gender equality. You will certainly learn more about this during the forum from my Swiss colleagues. In summary, what I'm saying this is that modernization and dialogue are incredibly important pillars for the NSOs, not only to provide evidence-based data and statistics for political and economic decision-making, but also to align their activities with the information needs to the society. And we need the ability to exploit the full potential of these data using modern methods. To conclude, on behalf of the FSO, I would like to wish you a fruitful global forum on gender statistics, inspiring discussions, and many insights in creative solutions in order to produce and further develop high quality, reliable, accessible, and user-oriented data, and of course, statistics on gender equality. So your expertise is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you so much, George and Stefan, for your opening remarks, for sharing with us your perspectives and the priorities from your own offices on what we need to do to improve gender statistics. Of course, keywords like integration, innovation, modernization. George, you also touched on the importance of dialogue for better data and better policy making. So this is all very welcome, and I can tell you that you set the stage for a very rich discussion over the next 2 days. Thank you again. So I would also like to extend a warm welcome to all. I'm Francesca Grum. I'm in charge of social and gender statistics at the UN Statistics Division. Stefan is my boss. And together with my dear colleague and good friend from the Federal Statistical Office, Katia Brangham, who is with us, we will be co-hosting the forum over the next 2 days. So moving on, without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Thomas Gunnarsson. Thomas is a gender photographer, a journalist, and a gender expert with extensive experience on gender-sensitive and inclusive communication. Through his work, Thomas shows us how images can perpetuate narrow gender roles, or can actually challenge stereotypes and properly mirror everyone in society, not just those who fit in traditional roles. Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be invited to do the keynote for this forum. And I'm not a gender statistician, but I'm a gender photographer. For many years, I was a normal photographer. Then I got a bachelor's degree in journalism, and then another bachelor's degree in gender studies. And all this made it spin in my head. And I started realizing, as a photographer, how I was a part of perpetuating gender stereotypes with my own images, unconsciously. And I started looking at magazines, advertisements, and realized that there's, not in Sweden then at least, there wasn't a discussion about what do all these gender stereotypes do to us, and how could you possibly challenge them if you're in a role where you can create images or select images for some kind of communication in your work. So what I do now under the name gender photographer is that I do lectures, obviously. I create guidebooks and photo exhibitions to open people's eyes to how communication that at a first glance seems to be neutral can in fact include norms, stereotypes, and that many people are missing from the communication that shows who gets to represent the normal citizen in any kind of communication. Can you all see my PowerPoint now? Full screen? Great. So I've created a guidebook that's I would be touring the world with right now if it weren't for the pandemic. It's called Images That Changed the World, a guide to equal communication. And this is a guidebook I created with a small city in the middle of Sweden. In 2016, it was released. And then the Swedish Institute, a governmental institution in Sweden, picked this up to create a toolkit that could be used internationally. So I was in China, Russia, Mexico, doing workshops and giving lectures around this exhibition and guidebook. But it's interesting why it all started. It was because the city of Gävle got criticized for images that they used in brochures, in advertisements, on their homepage, images that were only meant to be normal, everyday photos showing the city from its best side. But then they also decided to put up these pictures as big posters in the city hall windows. And the city hall is right in the middle of the city. You have the biggest walking street that passes by those windows, the biggest square in the city. And then people started reacting to these images that had been around in the brochures in the city and said, do you realize how these images diminish young girls, for example? And the communications director sat like a question mark and was like, what? What have people seen now in these images? So then they had to somehow take a step back and analyze these pictures. And then they had heard about me, the gender photographer, called me. And I was familiar with this kind of pattern that different campaigns get criticized, for example, or images in the media. This is another example. That was sent to me. I also have a blog, The Gender Photographer, where people can send examples from the media or advertisements, and then I analyze them. And this is an ad from an insurance company that wanted their customers to know that they also have a bank. And as a customer at this insurance company, you're also a small part owner of the bank. So then they had kind of an equal message they wanted to put forth, that anyone can become a bank owner. But if we look at the female bank owner here in this ad and the male bank owner, you can see very common gender stereotypes. The female bank owner says, who could have guessed that I would own my own bank? She plays with her hair or with her earring. She has a ribbon on her head, very cute detail, and has like a shy, careful smile. While the male bank owner says, of course I own my own bank, don't you? His arms crossed, looked very self-confident. And I would say this is perhaps the most common gender cliche, that men are portrayed as confident, the natural leaders or experts, while I think the image of her looks like it's from the 50s, some kind of 1950s ad. Like this, for example, an ad for a ketchup bottle that is so easy to open that even women can open it. But the thinking behind this ad was, as I said, it was kind of an equal message they wanted to put out. Anyone can become a bank owner. But they didn't take that necessary step back and see, okay, what do these characters say? Communicate with their body language and with their lines compared to each other like this also. And going back to the city of Gävle's images, the easiest thing you can do, the first thing I do when I analyze a set of images is to count heads, to just look at representation. Okay, who is actually represented in these images? And there are, for those who like data, there's an excellent project called the Global Media Monitoring Report that every 5 years is published, supported among others by UN Women, so that you can actually see what happens year over year. Does it get more equal? Now the numbers are 25% women and 75% men who get to be the main persons, so to speak, in our news articles, in print media, in radio. In Sweden, the balance is a little bit better, but not much better. 70% men, 30% women. So that's, you can also apply, of course, to any set of images you analyze. It's just going back. Journalists often have an excuse for this. They say that, well, men are overrepresented in important parts of society that we surveil, politics, business. Men are overrepresented at the top. So what should we do? Aren't we supposed to just neutrally mirror reality? But if you apply that argument to images, for example, from a city or for a governmental institution, is this really an accurate depiction of reality? Why are there twice as many men as women in these images? So, I mean, not in no cities in Sweden do you have this actual unbalance between men and women. But here, I think this tool ceases to be interesting when you talk about gender. You also, of course, need to go in on the interpretation level and see, what do people do in these images? What roles do they have? And when I did that, spread out these images, used pens to circle and make my notes, I think it's very easy to just, with a couple of words, describe what people are doing in the pictures. Because then it gets easier to analyze instead of just blankly looking at images. And in almost all pictures of men in these photos from Gävle, they were active. Doing sports, working, conquering rivers with their kayaks. In almost all images of women, they are either taking care of kids or being passive, sitting still, posing. And it gets more obvious when you look at one image at a time. The tough, active boys who throw themselves out into the water from a pier, and a group of girls just passively observing the boys. So the message here somehow is that men do things and women watch. And then you put your municipality logo on these images to communicate, oh, here in Gävle, we love gender stereotypes. So if you want it to be like in the 1950s, move here. I mean, this image, the dad is mansplaining how you mini golf, and a woman, and the mother looks like she's so impressed that she almost explodes. This really, I think, looks like a 1950s ad in itself. So I did a gender renovation of this image. One of the first things I did when we created this guidebook was finding the same family again. I let them bowl instead and took a photo when it was the mother's turn to throw the bowling ball, and when dad was cheerleader with the kids. And I think this is one very effective method of highlighting and with a twinkle in the eye, kind of challenging these roles. But you can go back to how accurately does this really depict Sweden 2021. I mean, women do sports, women work, and men take care of children, but you didn't see that in images. And that they themselves realized was a failure. But then we almost failed a little bit when we took this first example, because as soon as I had taken this picture and was very happy with the result, I thought it looks very similar, looks like it's the same photographer almost. I mean, a good remake. I realized I could have renovated the family from other categories than just gender, because it's still the most common family you see in Swedish media, advertisements, governmental communication. The white middle class heterosexual family, mom, dad, 2 kids. So then, quite early on still, we realized we can't only do a guide to equal communication and only talk about gender. So then I wondered, what kind of checklist could you have if you also want to be inclusive in your communication? And there is a very robust checklist in Swedish law. In the Swedish Discrimination Act, you have these 7 grounds for discrimination: gender, transgender identity, ethnicity, religion or other belief, disability, sexual orientation, and age. And I have found that many big companies and governmental institutions and schools, they buy this right away, that of course we should implement this in our communication policy. And I tested it out on the pictures from the city of Gävle, of course. And they were a little bit like, oh, weren't you done with those images already? But I counted heads again using that checklist and noticed that there were only 2 people who seemed to be over 60 in these images. In reality, in Sweden, 25% of people are over 60. Only 2 people to seem to have a non-Nordic background. So it's about the same in Sweden, should be 10 times as many in these pictures if it were to be an accurate depiction of Sweden today. No people with visible disabilities, no same-sex couples. At least a seagull was represented. So a little bit of diversity. But I mean, it's impossible if you have this kind of mirror argument that all the people living in this city with 100,000 citizens would be straight, for example. So taking a picture like this and adding it to the collection or the image vault from this municipality is about fixing that broken mirror. And this was a couple, when we searched for volunteer models in the city for this project, they wrote an email and said, we're just 2 ordinary cultural ladies who happen to be married, but maybe you want to portray us anyway. And the art director that I worked with on this project, he wrote an email to me where he wrote, oh, look, an old lesbian couple, heart, heart, heart. And by mistake, he sent it to them. And then he sat there and blushed with the cold sweat running down his face. Because, I mean, that could maybe feel a little bit exoticizing, I would suspect. And I think that's one of the traps to look out for. It is very, very important to combat discrimination by making people visible. So I'm not saying that isn't important, but there is kind of a trap I think you should avoid. But first, to make an argument for why visibility is so important, take transgender people, for example, a group, when you look at statistics from the Public Health Agency in Sweden, they had a study that showed that 60% of transgender youth have seriously considered suicide, and 40% have made at least 1 suicide attempt. And those numbers are black, really horrifying, especially if you compare to the public in general. And one important detail here is that many people don't believe in this kind of identity, doesn't know what it means to be a transgender boy, like Jas, for example, who I came to his school and portrayed him. And thankfully, he could be open in this little village with 1,000 citizens. And that's not always the case. But still, he says that he gets misunderstood. And he even corrected his mom. Mom, I don't want to be a boy. I am a boy. I mean, who could say how anyone else identifies? That's subjective. Anyway, so visibility is very, very important. But I realized when we made a photo exhibition to release this guidebook, because actually at first it was only going to be this guidebook. Then I started to think, well, would I make a photo exhibition with images of heterosexual couples? The heterosexuals? No, I wouldn't do that. And I realized the risk is if you only portray certain groups in society once a year, when it's the Pride Festival, for example, then you still say that these people are different. You're actually doing nothing to challenge this division of people who gets to be the norm, the normal couple, the normal family, and the people who always gets to be an exception. even if it's in a positive light, like in this exhibition. So then I started to think, oh, if you really want to be inclusive when it comes to communication, what's the method you should use? And I came up with a catchphrase that you should include without making it obvious. Because when I looked around at companies that I suspected was good at this, I saw that, that's the way they include. IKEA, for example, they had an interview with a lesbian couple in one of their winter catalogs, and never once in this interview did they have any questions about their sexual orientation. All the questions, all the captions or headlines was about furniture, their interior design. And then you have included someone from an often underrepresented group or invisible group in society, but you're not saying that these people are special. So that's, I think, the real key to being really inclusive. And Valborg, for example, they had this image. And I don't have it with the copy, but it said something like, choose Volvo, blah, 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 to take care of the people you love. I mean, to keep the people you love safe. And not like having a rainbow or saying, oh, it's Pride Festival soon, just an ordinary ad from this car company. So I thought that was brilliant. And the city of Gävle, after we created this guidebook, to show that they actually had understood these ideas and took them to heart, they created a photo exhibition called 100 Gävle Citizens. And you can see, if you compare to these summer images, that this is a much more accurate depiction, or a much more diverse depiction, at least. You have people of all ages, all ethnicities, genders, and a diversity of expressions as well. But when it got really, I mean, this is still making people visible, representing the citizens in an accurate way. But when it got really inclusive, I think, was when they used people as ambassadors in their social media. And they let them, for example, they had a summer campaign where different citizens got to give their recommendations for what to do in the city in the summer. And among them, for example, was Esther Isaksson, a 3-year-old with Down syndrome. And she wasn't highlighted as an example of a kid with a disability. She was a citizen who got to give her best summer recommendations to other people who visits, if it's tourists or people who have to have a staycation. My favorite is the water park at Furuvik Zoo. And this is a picture I took. They actually had this picture to start with, but I realized, oh, we need to actually illustrate the thing she thinks is the most fun thing to do in the summer, to really hammer this point home. And another thing you can talk about is norms. When you talk about communication, a norm is often something that is taken for granted in the text or in the ad or whatever you're analyzing. For example, if you look at this shower soap from Axe and you turn it around, you have an instruction for how to use it. Use this soap to get unlimited female attention. And what's taken for granted here? Yeah, that all men are interested in female attention. So the heteronorm you could discover at the back of this shower soap. And you can also, with images, challenge and question these norms. For example, if you look at bandages in Sweden, in the pharmacies, they're only available in one color, the light beige color we call white. So what I did here was that I ordered brown bandages also from Amazon, and I let this couple illustrate what these bandages do. And it's so interesting because Marcus, when I even explained, this is a young married couple, Marcus and Ikram. When I explained this idea, he was like, oh, okay, that's what the bandage is trying to do with this light beige color. It's supposed to imitate my skin. And if you're not part of the norm, that's something it can't have missed you, that message. Ikram have thought about that every time she has to buy a light beige bandage. So I wanted to make a point about this, but I also realized you can also question a norm, I think, of why are you supposed to match your own skin? Can't you match someone you love instead? So another point of challenging a norm. You can't be what you can't see. That's one of the most passed around quotes among people who work with communication and gender equality, because it has been established since long in research that we need role models. We need to see people who look like ourselves in different positions or professions to realize that, oh, I can also do this. And if you've never seen someone that looks like you in a certain profession, you might not even get to the idea to try that yourself. Can a girl become a professor? 7-year-old Amanda asked her mother, and her mother said, of course. But Amanda didn't believe her. She was like, no, because she had never seen a professor in an ad or in a children's book that was a woman. But then her mother did a very good thing. She wrote down their dialogue with her daughter in disbelief, and she posted it on Facebook. And that post got viral. And after a couple of weeks, Amanda started to get postcards from professors all over Sweden who said, female professors who said that I do research about space, or I lecture about history, and you can also become a professor. So that led to a very, very good campaign. Then Amanda decided, I think I'm gonna become an artist instead. Ungrateful kid. But we have these images around us every day. This is from a Swedish morning newspaper, the biggest Swedish morning newspaper, who had gotten a report that said that Swedish bosses are good at giving praise. A new poll showed that. And they could have used any image to illustrate this headline, because a Swedish boss can have any gender, any age, but still you can see that they cement the idea of how the boss is expected to look like. He is a man, first of all, older, white, married, espresso drinker, suit wearer. And as I said, these images, they pour more cement on this already existing mental image we have of what a boss is supposed to look like. And every time you select an image, or you're about to take an image, you have this chance of, instead of putting cement on stereotypes, you can challenge them and tickle our imagination and remind us that we can become anything we want. If you have the job to illustrate what a carpenter looks like, or preschool teacher, or a biker, you always have that chance to think, oh, what's the most expected image? I think people already know that men can become carpenters and that women can become preschool teachers. So there's, I think, more power in selecting the unexpected image to remind us all that we can become anything we want. And you can always challenge these norms in other ways. I created this image just to play with what mental image pops out. And in the exhibition, if you walk around a corner, then you meet this image. But there's many creative methods you can use to challenge these stereotypes. And when it comes to gender cliches, the first step should be to identify them. And I think it's very, very effectful and even important to make some kind of checklists to know what to look out for, or in my case as a photographer, to avoid. And I repeated all these kind of gender cliches in the beginning of my career. Like this, for example, one of the most common gender cliches, depicting men from below and women slightly from above. And this perspective to the right, you can see in a lot of political photos, where on purpose they have portrayed these men from below to make them look more powerful, impressive, impactful. And if you photograph someone from above, the person mostly looks smaller, cute, submissive. And interestingly enough, many of the examples I'm being sent are of women with a lot of power, very, very powerful, that women that has gotten a very steep perspectives. Like this, for example, she was CEO of the two of the biggest news magazines in Sweden, portrayed almost straight from above. I mean, I'm wondering where the photographer is taking this photo, hanging from the ceiling fan, I don't know. Melinda Gates, she's actually the 6th most powerful woman according to Forbes. Also photographed from above with a flowery carpet in the background. She has no desk to work at. And this was the party leader of the Conservative Party in Sweden. When this portrait was taken, almost, I mean, is this picture taken with a drone? How do you even get so far above this woman? But it's interesting because she, Anna Kinberg Batra, as she's called, she got the criticism often that she was too cold, too inhuman to really connect with people. And that's very seldom the case, that men get criticized for being too cold. Then it's often seen as something positive, to be cold and rational, keeping your head cold in crisis, for example. But when she was starting to lose voters, her numbers were going down, suddenly you start to see pictures like this. Pictures where I think the idea was that she would look more human, relatable, down to earth, warm, red color in her dress, giggling with a coffee cup in her knee. Not a very common power portrait, I would say, but maybe not a very natural image at all. It reminds me of another cliche that is called women laughing alone, eating salad. Something you do as a woman, I guess. Very common image in image vaults. So I have so many examples like this that you wouldn't believe in the folders in my computer of women not really taken seriously, not getting their actual power communicated in the images. This is a food company CEO who was asked for some reason by the photographer to stand on her knees in the freezer on a bed of frozen Brussels sprouts to a very serious political article. But what has happened since I started to write and do lectures and photo projects about this 10 years ago is that now people react to this. Someone was very quick on Twitter with putting down a male CEO in the freezer as well as comparison. So I've seen positive, more awareness in recent years. And you should always also, I think, not only talk about how women are portrayed and for sure diminished in many ways in the media. Infantilization is another thing you could look for. The woman to the left is a very influential political reporter and author, and she gets to lie on the floor on this magazine cover, looking very cute, with glittering eyes, on a pile of paper. And I mean, does she write her manuscripts by hand? I mean, but men are also diminished, I would say, and dehumanized in the way that they don't get to show the whole register of human emotions. As a man, you're always supposed to look very dominant. And I mean, many times it doesn't make you look very credible, I think, as a boss to be portrayed like this. I mean, what kind of message does that send out? And I'm sure you've heard the term manspreading, and he's has the widest manspread I've seen, I think. And I also I've coined my own term, the murder gaze. That when you're supposed to look really successful and masculine, you can see it on business magazines and gentlemen's magazines. You're supposed to look like you want to strangle the photographer. And I mean, when you notice it, it's quite funny. You can laugh them away, these murderers. But also, like journalists often say, that men are overrepresented in the top of society. Yeah, that's true. But men are also overrepresented at the bottom of society. Most people who end up in addiction, most homeless people are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. 70% of all people who commit suicide in Sweden are men. And I think that's deeply connected in this notion that you always have to be dominant, on top, successful. You can't show weakness, you can't show vulnerability or cry for help, because then you're not a real man. So in many ways, I think the male gender stereotype or male gender ideal is often more narrow. And I noticed this example a couple of years ago to parenting magazines in Sweden, Mamma and Pappa. And except for the fact that we have a row of murderers on Pappa's covers, do you notice anything missing from the Daddy magazine's covers? Kids, for example. could be a good idea if you're writing about parenting. But I wrote about this magazine Pappa 2 times in my blog, and the second time I actually got a response. The CEO of the publishing house that gives out this magazine said, "Hey, I saw the picture of your lecture, blah, blah, blah. Of course, you're right. From now on, we will have Dad with kids. That's what the magazine is all about." Smiley. So I was very encouraged by this reply. And then, sure enough, they had attached the latest cover. And when I read the email more carefully, it says, "Oh, the latest cover shows Dad, son, and motorcycle." So a new kind of nuclear family, maybe. But yeah, as a policy, they changed their policy. There's always supposed to be a man, dad, and kid on the covers. And then this first cover, I think maybe some kind of transition. Here, I think the kid looks like a murderer. And it's only one color shade, like rust colored. But it was a good step in the right direction. This is an image I've taken for the photo project, Images That Change the World. I would like to see their covers look a little bit more like this. This is Sergio and his newborn son, Almar, posing in front of their tapestry that they have at home. They actually have this tapestry of a tree with mustaches and beards growing from it instead of leaves. I think it's wonderful. And as a final example, the communications director from Gävle, the city of Gävle, I think they were very humble and courageous to listen to criticism and actually doing something constructive with it. And he himself, who greenlit this project as communications director, I think he was also very helpful when we created this guidebook, because I said to him, maybe you can help me illustrate some feminine gender stereotypes, because gender stereotypes are often more obvious when the opposite gender performs them in front of the camera. I'll show you what I mean. I'll let him, for example, pose with me taking a cute from above perspective. But I think that this was just a good image of him. Looks like a boss you would actually dare to approach, a boss that listens. This I also think looks like an approachable, listening boss, very available. Come, let's talk about your salary, Thomas. And then, of course, to actually copy the kind of images you can see in the media, we moved him to a blood red sofa and let him have a little more flirtatious body language. And it was so fun because he analyzed himself while doing these poses. And he said, if I had my finger on my shin, that would be an acceptable pose for a male leader. But playing with your lips, that's not something you're supposed to do. But very willing to actually break this trend. And this image, I think, we're both most proud of because it was very demanding for him physically to achieve this pose. That were inspired by many examples we could find of women lying in sofas, sitting in sofas, lying on the floor. So we named this piece of art Posing Like a Boss. And you can find many more examples like this if you visit my blog, genderphotographer.com. And you can also find this toolkit with the guidebook and photo exhibition images at sharingsweden.se. And you can actually just, I think it's easier to Google Sharing Sweden and Images That Change the World. Perhaps you can share the link to the participants later.
Thank you. Thomas, apologies. Yes, if you can just wrap up, it's a big applause. This is fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone have any questions, and if we have time, I would be glad to discuss.
Yes. Unfortunately, Thomas, we are running a little bit late. I can tell you that we had a lot of, the chat was really rich and going on. A few questions for you. You may want to take a look as we go on. I'm also curious to see, I'm sure that both Stefan and George and Sylvie, you got some ideas for your next photo shoot. We are looking forward to see you in from a different angle. But yeah, thank you so much, Thomas. I think that your checklist for promoting inclusive communication to make everyone visible without making it obvious. I think it's one of the key elements out of your intervention. I also like how you stressed the importance of avoiding gender cliché, but not just for women, also for men. So we should also really put the emphasis on men when we talk about gender equality, when we talk about gender statistics with our community of experts. So thank you, Thomas. Please stay with us if you can and take a look at the chat, because there is a lot of interest on your work. And having said that, I thank you again, and I think we are ready to move into the substantive discussion. We are ready to move into session 1, where we will discuss the use of gender statistics and data for policy making and monitoring. I'm happy to introduce Ms. Sylvie Durer, who is the director of the Federal Office for Gender Equality in Switzerland. Sylvie, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Francesca, and congrats, Thomas, for your work and for your speech. You mentioned the Global Media Monitoring Project. We also, Switzerland was also part of this project, and the last numbers were not good. So there are only about 28% of women who are mentioned in the news. So we still have a lot of work to do in order to have parity in this field. And I'm not speaking about stereotyping, because there also we have a lot of work to do, like in many countries. So, dear panelists, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first panel of the AIDS Global Forum on Gender Statistics, which will focus on the effective use of gender statistics and data for policy making and monitoring, including in times of crisis. As was said, my name is Sylvie Durer. I am the director of the Swiss Federal Office for Gender Equality, and I also have the pleasure to chair the Equal Pay International Coalition, launched by ILO, OECD, and UN Women, and to be vice chair of the Bureau of the OECD Working Group on Gender Mainstreaming and Governance. Developing and implementing policies are at the center of my different positions in those institutions. To do so, data and statistical issues play a crucial role. On behalf of Switzerland, I would first like to express my appreciation for the opportunity to host this edition of the Global Forum on Gender Statistics and to moderate this important panel. We are delighted that people from all over the world, from countries such as Austria, Japan, Nigeria, or Argentina, have registered. The participants to this panel work for national statistical offices, international organizations, NGOs, the private sector, or the academia. Welcome to all of you. I really look forward to this exchange. We are all eager to hear the experts, but before getting into the substance of this session, I want to mention that there is a chat box function. Most of you have already seen it, and some of you have used it. Please use it, bring your questions, your remarks. We will try to mention them and to give answers in the Q&A part. Dear participants, today's goal is to address the challenging topic of gender statistics with regard to policy making. Let me underline that gender statistics are all too often seen as a technical issue, whereas they are a prerequisite for effective action by states, international organizations, or other stakeholders to identify the challenges that affect to a different extent women and men and achieve gender equality. In other terms, statistics must serve the action of all stakeholders interested in identifying the challenges of our society, contributing to their processing, and measuring the effectiveness of the responses provided. And this is a very principle of evidence-based policy making. To be more specific, though, by way of an example, I would like to tell you about domestic violence in times of COVID-19 in my country. In Switzerland, as elsewhere in the world, at the beginning of the crisis in March 2020, experts feared an explosion of domestic violence cases caused among other things by the general uncertainty, explosion of domestic economic stress and containment measures. Therefore, in Switzerland, we immediately set up a task force. At this time, it was crucial to have timely data on domestic violence in the different regions in order to assess the situation and to swiftly adopt appropriate measures if necessary. The main source in Switzerland for assessing the extent of domestic violence is the police crime statistics, a very good statistics. However, such data for the year 2020 was only available from March 2021. Without the necessary statistics, it was difficult to determine if the measures we decided upon were appropriate. This illustrates why, without good statistics, we fly blind, and how difficult it can be to meet the needs of victims, the majority of whom are women. I have used this example of violence here, but I could mention the role played by statistics in other issues. Recently, to better take into account the needs of women, my office has been tasked to ensure that all main statistics and studies of the Swiss Confederation are broken down by gender, or more precisely, that they analyze and show the consequences of their subject matter for both sexes. Please, I would be very interested if in the chat box there are measures and ideas about how we can face this challenge, how we can make men and women more visible in all their activities, what kind of good practice other countries have. Dear participants, dear panelists, we have all understood gender statistics are of utmost importance, and to explore the issue in more depth, we are lucky to count 5 experts today. I will give the floor to each of them, and then we will have, as I said, a small Q&A with the audience. So it's my pleasure to introduce Hishayeen Park, Aishat Shahuda from the Republic of Maldives, Hiyeshin Park from OECD, Aishat Shahuda from the Republic of Maldives, Lina Salanovskait from the European Institute for Gender Equality, Stefan Verhulst from the GovLab, and Papasek from UN Women. Let's start then with our first panelist, Hiyeshin Park. Hiyeshin Park is an economist and gender program coordinator with the OECD Development Center. She leads the gender team who produces the Social Institution and Gender Index, SIGE, a cross-country measure of discriminatory social institutions. Hiyeshin, the OECD through the SIGE has been a long advocate for measuring the underlying drivers to gender equality. So my question is, why do we need collect data on discriminatory social institutions and the drivers of gender equality, and what exactly we should seek to measure? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. Do you hear me well? Okay, this is good. Yes, I think we can go to the next slide already. So thank you very much, Sylvie, again. It's really great to be here with you all, and I hope that I can make meaningful contribution to this very discussion today. It will actually touch upon a lot of the points that Thomas has already beautifully and skillfully pointed out during his keynote speech. So we at the OECD Development Center, through the Social Institutions and Gender Index, SIGI, we've been measuring what we call root causes or drivers of gender inequality over a decade now, since 2009. So what do we call drivers, and why do we measure them? As shown by the SDGs monitoring, and especially the SDG 5, countries around the world have made progress towards gender equality and women's empowerment. However, the progress we've seen have not necessarily been as fast as we expected. And also many countries are falling short of their 2030 targets, especially within the context of COVID-19 crisis. One of the main barriers for achieving these targets are discriminatory social institutions, and they are often invisible, those that are in the hidden part of the iceberg that you see now. These are the discrimination against women and girls that are embedded in our legal frameworks, both formal and informal, and social norms and practices. And these discriminatory social institutions restrict women and girls' rights and their empowerment opportunities. I'll give you some examples. As measured by many indicators such as UN's Gender Inequality Index to GII, there are gaps between men and women when it comes to labor market opportunities. SIGI complements the whole picture by providing data on why these gender gaps persist by looking at first, do countries provide legal frameworks that guarantee women and men to enjoy equal rights and opportunities in the workplace? And also, how many people in the country think that it is not acceptable for women to have a paid job outside the home, even if when she wants one? Half of the global population think that children will suffer when their mothers are working for pay. And all of these give additional barriers for women to choose any other activities outside the home, contributing to the fact that we still see the gender gap in labor force participation. Another example is gender-based violence. While we know that about a third of women were victims of domestic violence in their lifetime, and more so during the lockdown and COVID-19 crisis, no country in the world has legal frameworks that protect women and girls in a fully comprehensive way. So we measure to what extent are we legally protecting women and girls from any type of violence against women. And also we want to know how many people, how many women think that husband beating his wife can be justified. Across the world, 27% of women think this violent act can actually be accepted under certain circumstances. So all that to say, discriminatory social institutions matter, and their social norms have bearings on women's empowerment across many areas, including health, labor force participation, horizontal segregation and education, and so on. Can we go to the next slide, please? I would just like to conclude by sharing this one last slide with you, which shows a simple correlation between the SIGI and the AGI, the Africa Gender Index, which is produced by the African Development Bank and UNECA. It simply shows a strong link between the discriminatory social institutions and the gender gaps across the three dimensions, social, which includes health and education, economic, and the political dimension. More will come with our forthcoming SIGI regional report for Africa in December this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very interesting input, and also for the very eloquent picture of the iceberg hygiene. To go further, but really in 2-3 sentences, could you tell us what are the most acute challenges when it comes to collect data on social institutions? But really in 2-3 sentences, could you tell us something about it?
Sorry, I lost you for 10 seconds there.
Do you want me to repeat the question? So my question is, can you tell us what the most acute challenges are when it comes to collect data on social institutions, but very, very briefly in 2-3 seconds?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so one of the biggest challenge we face is obviously the scarcity of data, especially right now. We're trying to update the last edition of SIGI to be published in 2023. But the scarcity of data is definitely a challenge, especially those that measure attitudes and social norms in a global and comprehensive way that would allow us to make some cross-country comparisons. So it is definitely an area where more needs to be done to have targeted and harmonized databases, also in a sustainable way, so that we can also monitor the transformation of societies. Maybe just one more thing to add, if I can. As much efforts are needed at the global level, more should also be done at the subnational level, because we also know that social norms differ one region to the other, rural areas to urban areas, or capitals to areas that are closer to the borders. And also issues of concern differ depending on different localities as well. And this is why we do use the SIGI global framework to be adapted at the national level, working with national statistical offices to collect data through household survey and focus group discussions on how pervasive these gender norms are in different regions and to what extent harmful practices are actually being held. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Hye-Jin. Well, Switzerland is very much aware of it because we have 4 different languages and so on and so on. So it's a very important issue for a lot of countries also. So thank you. Now we will hear Aishat Shahuda. Aishat Shahuda is currently the Deputy Chief Statistician of the Maldives Bureau of the Statistics. Her responsibilities lie in leadership and management of the Statistics Bureau, as well as in the development and coordination of the National Statistical System of Maldives. Aishat, Maldives has been working on improving evidence on gender equality through the Women Count program. Can you speak on this experience, sharing some examples on the approach Maldives Bureau of Statistics has taken? What work has been done to improve the gender statistics at country level? Thank you very much for your answer. You have the floor.
Very much, Sylvie. Under the Women Count project, in partnership with Paris 21, the Maldives Bureau of Statistics undertook a gender statistics assessment, and we worked together with the Ministry of Gender and other stakeholders. And one thing that we applied was the framework that Paris 21 has come up with to do this assessment. And we were looking at the SDG indicators together with the gender minimum set of indicators that are used by UN to see what are the gender data gaps. So we looked at found that out of the 51 indicators, 51 out of the 89 unique gender specific indicators data were available. So it's like 57% of the data that we were looking at were available at the time. And because of this, we found out that we had a huge data gap. And some of the areas that the data gaps were identified were on the ownership and control of land, sexual violence, occupational injuries and fatalities, public transport, human trafficking, and some of the qualitative indicators on gender integration in the legal framework, also on environmental statistics and the linkages with gender. And one of the recommendations we had during this assessment was that there's a need to do this work in a structured manner. So we came up with a formulated an interagency working group on gender statistics, where we have stakeholders from all the agencies who collect these gender statistics. And sometimes they don't even realize that the data they have through many of these administrative records, how important it is to disaggregate by gender and to come up with indicators using this. So one of the things we achieved is to raise a lot of awareness and build partnerships and did some training on the importance of gender statistics and how important it is to identify the data gaps and to try and fill these data gaps in a more structured manner. I think that's the, and we are following up on this exercise to try and improve this by using the recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aishat. One more question, if I may. Looking forward, how do you intend to leverage and use gender statistics to make these statistics more actionable and get used in policy making, which is the main goal of our discussion today? So how are you going to use them in the context of policy making?
The most important statistics development strategy that we are currently working on from this year till 2030. So that is where we are going to try and address these data gaps that has been identified and to come up with integrate the gender component into the NSTS, as well as to come up with a separate gender statistics development strategies, which has a pathway on how we are going to come up with the different indicators and what are the data sources that we have to create, come up with more detailed action plans on how we are going to achieve this. It will include additional new data collection as well as engaging the data users so that people are more equipped to know what is available, what the gaps are, and how we can going forward leverage this into more policy action. So that these are one of the things, and the technical working group we have we will mobilize them as a vehicle to do this. And also there's a gender equality action plan that the gender ministry is working on. So we are working very closely with the relevant stakeholders, especially this partnership, I think is something that we have established, and in going forward, it will help us a lot in taking this to the policy level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aishat. We'll come back eventually to you later on with the questions we are receiving on the chat. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Lina Salanauskait. So Lina Salanauskait is a researcher at the European Institute for Gender Equality, AGE, where she joined in 2016. Prior to AGE, Lina worked in the EU Commission, DG Employment, and also across a few academic institutions. So Lina, the European Institute for Gender Equality has recently analyzed the emerging socioeconomic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic from gender equality perspective. So my first question is, what are the challenges in identifying gender equality consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic across the EU? You have
Many thanks for inviting to this event and actually to allow us to speak about our current research in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have done this research to support the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union, which they held in the first semester of 2021. And we faced numerous data challenges to identify gender equality consequences of the pandemic. Today, I would like to highlight just a few of them. First of all, availability of timely data. You touched upon this already in your introduction, so just quickly going through this. Pandemic consequences that we had to account for were highly different across the countries, across spaces, across the modalities of the rules, and actually about the availability of these rules to us researchers. At the same time, we are very much used to work with data, which is typically already prepared and available, maybe with a delay of 1 or 2 years. That's a typical case in the social sciences. So nothing of this was applicable to our current work. We had to work with the data that was coming in, the rules were changing, etc., etc. And at the same time, there was a huge, I would say, which is a positive sign, a request and an increase in attention in terms of receiving gender equality and actually creating policies that would be based on facts and on the emerging evidence. Maybe one of the second challenges, if I would want to mention today, would actually also be still getting back to the data and working with comparable and robust data, which is very much of importance when working for the EU and for different member states, because of course situation is still quite different across the member states. So that was also a challenge for our research, is to get robust and comparable data sources, which actually also a lot involved our researchers going and delving into the national data sources in national languages. And that's an extra challenge, I think, in the EU. And last but not least, what I would like to mention today is actually stressing the challenge of operating within the agreed statistical indicators and terms when evaluating the pandemic effects, for example, in the labor market. So we noted that most of our statistical indicators do not really capture the gender equality effects. And we talk about such things as employment rates, as actual number of working hours, etc. Simply because due to the pandemic, the way we manage the pandemic and introduce government measures, the boundaries of the realms between the paid work and the unpaid work essentially blurred. And so capturing and establishing these facts of what are the gender equality effects on the labor market while going through the pandemic was an enormous task, and we did our best. And we still acknowledge that this is challenging, not only last year, but still now. So we're looking also into the future how to go about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lina. But do you already have some thoughts and some way you are going to address these challenges? Because you said it's so important to have timely, robust, comparable data and also indicators where we agree upon. But then you said, okay, it's very difficult to have all this. So do you have already made some reflections about the way you are going to address these issues?
Yes, thank you. So today, due to the limited scope, I will mention just two of the very different initiatives we have. So first of all, I would like to mention our forthcoming event, the release of the Gender Equality Index, which will be on October 28th. This is our annual event. In this event, we'll actually also look not only into revealing the gender equality scores for the EU and for the member states, but also to discuss about the status quo of gender equality using the most timely and available data sources, and also specifically to talk about the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. So a bit going after the research that we already have done for the Portuguese presidency. Now, the other initiative that we started already at the end of 2020, when we realized the major data challenges when working on this topic, was actually collection of our own survey data. So we launched this project, and I have to say that we have successfully collected data from all the member states with about more than 40,000 respondents this summer. So we have this data available and we are looking into it. And essentially the focus of this data was to looking into and to identify changes in paid work and unpaid work within household members. How did it change due to the pandemic? What are the responsibilities of women and men right now? How did the changes occur? To what extent maybe government measures were responsible for this? So we are looking into this data, and we will also make this data available publicly in 2022, and it will be also used for the release of the next year's Gender Equality Index. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lina. So I'm really looking forward to having the results of all the thoughts we are conducting. Thank you. So now I would like to give the floor to Stefan Verhulst. So Stefan Verhulst is the co-founder of the GovLab, an action research center focused on making policy decisions more legitimate, equitable, and effective using data and other technologies. Stefan Verhulst is also the editor-in-chief of Data and Policy by Cambridge University Press, and he's a member of the high-level expert group to the European Commission and Eurostat on using privately held data for official statistics. So Stefan, to inform policy making, we need to have access to all the data that can provide important insights. That includes non-traditional data sets that are privately held. So how new data collaboratives may advance gender-sensitive policies, in your opinion?
Yes, thanks, Sylvie, and thanks for having me on this distinguished panel, and congratulations with the conference today and tomorrow. And yeah, meaning I think the question is indeed the question of our time, meaning if we want to improve policies vis-a-vis gender and other societal challenges, we really have to figure out how do we manage the access to data that matters, that could make a difference if we start leveraging and especially reusing it for the questions that many of you already have formulated throughout this conference and throughout this panel. Because it turns out that quite often, of course, policymakers do have questions that needs to be answered, but quite often don't have access to the data. But at the same time, as a result of digital transformation, we are quite often in an environment where most organizations and corporations that have undergone a digital transformation are now also data organizations. And so the question is, how do we now try to develop access structures that can give us access to the data that quite often is privately held, but also other data sets in a way that is responsible, systematic, and sustainable. And that will require an investment in a whole range of areas. First of all, we will need new kinds of partnerships, which we call data collaboratives, because obviously most of the data that we are talking about is quite often sensitive, both from a personal point of view, but also quite often a commercial point of view. And so just making the data open quite often won't do. And so we really need to think about how do we structure new partnerships with those that need the data to inform policy and those that have the data that, if anyway incentivized, but also quite often engaged, could make the data more available. Just to give you an example of what is feasible here, a few years ago, with support from Data2X, we established a data collaborative in Santiago de Chile in order to really try to identify whether urban mobility is gendered. As you know, quite often urban mobility is approached as if there are no gender differences, as if women don't travel different than men. But unfortunately, quite often because we don't have the granularity of movement, we really don't know whether that anyway is the case. And if so, what are the differences between men and women as it relates to urban mobility? And so as a result of a data collaborative that we organized together with Telefonica, we managed to leverage mobile phone data and other data sets, including open transportation data, but also data from surveys that had been undertaken a year ago. We managed to really try to illustrate how urban mobility is gendered. And of course, surprise, surprise, we found that indeed women travel differently than men and vice versa. And that from a policy perspective, if you are developing urban mobility, you really cannot just have a one-fit-all kind of approach to urban mobility. You really need to become more sophisticated and take those kinds of differences into account. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to the study that emerged from that. Now, in order to make data collaboratives successful, we also not just need to come up with new partnerships, we need to also be able to prioritize the questions that matter. And that's another initiative that we have developed together with Data2X, where we actually took a step back and engaged a large community, and some of them are on this panel, where we actually tried to engage them to say, well, what are the questions that data collaboratives should start answering in order to really make a difference and inform public policy? And so that's the 100 questions that we developed. Again, was it perfect? No, but it was a new methodology, a participatory methodology to really not just to focus on the data, but to actually start with the questions. And then you have a much stronger ask to those that have data because the question has been validated by a group of experts, which we call bilinguals, domain experts and data experts at the same time, but also by the public at large, because we undertook a public voting campaign around those questions. And then you would basically have a question that really has the credibility and the validity for an engagement around other data sets. So these are just two elements that need to be done in order to really unlock privately held data. There are many more aspects to it as well, but I just give those as an example of some of the work we've done vis-a-vis gender and the gender gaps that already were referred to in this panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. This is very interesting and totally in line with the current discussions in Switzerland, but in a lot of countries. So now the topic of accessing privately held data is not new to the statistical community. yet much remains limited to experimentations. So how can we go beyond pilots and low-hanging fruit projects? This is a main issue for a lot of us here in this community. Do you have ideas about it?
Yeah, so that refers also to what I mentioned earlier, is that we really, as a society, and in this context, as a community, we really have to focus on how do we make data collaboration more systematic, sustainable, and responsible, to go beyond the pilots and to go beyond the one-off kind of initiatives. And again, that will require new methodologies, as I already have identified, and new partnership models, but it also require a new profession, a profession which we call chief data stewards or data stewards, that have the sophistication to really understand how to develop a data collaboration or a data innovation that is fit for purpose. And there are X amount of variables that comes into play to really determine the fit for purpose kind of approach. One is, of course, understanding the purpose, but then also, anyway, what are some of the variables with regard to, do you need to have access to the data all the time? Is it one-off? Is it to what extent do you need to have the raw data? To what extent is it aggregated data? To what extent is it experimental? To what extent is this something that informs official statistics over time? So there are X amount of variables that require basically a dedicated function. And that's what we call this new kind of data stewardship function that we really need to invest in, because otherwise we will never scale and it will always be a one-off kind of enterprise.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you. So it's very promising, but also very challenging. I'm going to speak with my HR department in order to see whether we have the possibility to have this kind of position, chief data steward. But I think we have still a lot of work to do in order to explain what it is about and why we need such functions. So thank you very much. Last but not least, before getting to the audience's questions and to the chat box, I would like to give the floor to Papa Sek. So good afternoon, Papa. Papa, you know, probably all of you know Papa Sek. He's the Chief of Research and Data Section. He leads the organization's research and statistical work, including Women Count Global Gender Data Program from UN Women. Papa Sek currently serves as co-chair of the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. Welcome, Papa. Papa, adequate funding is inevitably what makes progress in gender statistics possible, but it's a difficult issue. Yet, as the Paris 21 press report shows, each year resources are extremely limited. But UN Women has been successful in mobilizing resources for the Women Count program. Could you tell us how you did it? What has contributed to your success within this program? You have the floor, Papa.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and greetings to all. You're right. Adequate resources make our work to improve gender data possible. But unfortunately, it is not often prioritized in national statistical systems planning or resource allocation. And global financing for gender data, as Paris 21 press report shows, has plateaued in recent years and is still dependent on a top few donors. And we've, as you mentioned, we've been fortunate the last few years to raise the resources for our work on gender data. In 2016, UN Women made a conscious decision to step up its statistical work to support SDG monitoring and to inform countries' policies to achieve gender equality. Fortunately, we found a highly receptive donor audience that had also placed gender data high on its agenda. And through the Women Count program, we've since raised $45 million. One of the contributing factors was that the program responded to countries' needs by bringing different stakeholders together with the objective to link data production and policy use. The results have been strong so far. Not only have we contributed to an improvement in SDG data availability, our work also has resulted in several policy advances, including sexual harassment law in Georgia, the creation of the first rape crisis center in Albania, national care policy in Colombia, and soon also in Kenya, and several others, including policies that resulted from the innovative work that we did on COVID-19 data. We need to constantly engage with our funding partners in a holistic and meaningful manner. This is really, I think, one of the key characteristics of the program that we put together. We're also we're all investing our resources in this, financial or human, and this is towards a shared goal. So it is not just about benefiting from donors' financial support. We also need to cultivate a true relationship and work together on ways to better support countries, including by leveraging donors' influence and knowledge. And this is really, I think, the same approach that needs to happen at the country level with finance or budget ministries, really including them as key stakeholders. Hence, by aligning with national priorities and prioritizing data use to inform policies, we made and proved the strong case to invest in gender data. And for this reason, we see more governments investing in this area. In Cameroon, for instance, the government allocated $700,000 to the Women Count project to support national interventions for 2 consecutive years. The president of Kenya also, during the recent Generation Equality Forum, made strong pledges to address gender-based violence, including a commitment to conduct a survey in 2022 and to build a national gender-based violence data and information system. So this is just to say, that if we prioritize data use as a way to advocate for resources, we stand a better chance to succeed in raising resources.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Papa. So what are you expecting on the part of the global gender statistics community? How can they help in order to ensure that there are adequate and predictable resources? What would you like also to say to this community? As we said at the beginning, there are a lot of people who are coming from the national statistical offices, from international organizations, from the private sector, from academia, and so on. How can they help?
Yes, thanks. I guess to answer this question will probably take days of reflection by different stakeholders, including national policymakers. But let me just offer a teaser though. As I said, we must make a business case by improving how we use the data. This is absolutely critical. It sounds simple, but there is a catch. There are various factors that go into improving data use. It means having adequate gender equality policy in place, ensuring that gender statistics is mainstream in national statistical planning, such as the NSDS. It also means effective national gender statistics coordination, investing in gender data production that is backed by adequate methodologies to ensure data quality, good data dissemination, frequent collaboration between producers and users, and also building true partnerships. And let's also not forget the need to build the capacity of users, which is essential. So taken together, this is really about building gender responsive statistical systems. And that's how I think you end up having the resources needed because the data is actually demanded. And needless to say that this is hard work, but that is absolutely necessary. But if you allow me, I'll just mention one other issue that I think is really important that we don't talk about often. And this is inclusive data governance. The recent World Development Report, which is on data for development, speaks about the need for better data governance. But governance institutions should be reflective of the communities that they represent. There is currently a systematic lack of representation and effective participation of women in data institutions at all levels. And this imbalance needs to be addressed, or in my opinion, will lead to gender-biased data systems. And this is something that UN Women definitely plans to look into in the next phase of Women Count, but something that I think the global community should really try to address.
Thank you very much, Pepe. You said something which is so important. Without data statistics, we all fly blind. We need statistics in order to show us in what area we have to work, in what area we have done a good job, and so on, how we have to change eventually our actions. So it's very important for our policy making, whether it is in the private sector or in the public sector. So it's very important. And you said it also, and it was said by other panelists, we need data. We need also to make every person count. So these data have to be inclusive. So thank you very much for these messages. So this panel brings a lot of questions and discussions also in the chat box. So thank you very much to all persons who contribute in order to bring remarks, but also the persons who bring also already answers. Nevertheless, I have a few questions for the panelists. The first one for Lina, and second one for Hye-Shin, and then other ones I will come later on with other questions. So the first question is for Lina Salanauskait. Someone would like to know, Lina, if the various strategies you presented will remain after the pandemic. It is the first question. And before giving you the floor, I will ask a second question to Hye-Shin. Hye-Shin, there is one question from UNSD. UNSD would like to know if there are geographical differences of people who agree with sexist beliefs. If you can address this issue, but you have 2 minutes to think about the answer. And I take first the question for Lina. Lina, can you tell us if the various strategies you presented will remain after the pandemic? You have the floor, Lina.
Thank you for this question. Yes, actually, I think the short answer would be yes. So now to go a little bit more into details we are trying to collect robust data, so representing at least at the national level, in certain cases going into the regional level, and to have enough of representation for the regional entities that we are collecting the data for. So the COVID survey that we have done, it was the first survey that we have done for all the EU member states. Previous to that, and we are about to publish analysis, is our survey on platform work that we have done in 10 member states, and that was also looking into the gender equality perspective of the platform work. So we are testing the territories in terms of own data collection and what we can obtain with that in order to fill in certain data gaps. And of course, we have lots of data gaps also in the context of the Gender Equality Index, and that will also stay, of course, with us. It will be annual release. So yes, the current strategies are to be sustained in the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Lina. And Hye-Shin, do you have an answer or elements of answer you would like to bring?
Yes, I'll be quick. I already did share one link to share with everyone for the data sources, the JDDB at the OECD stats. But I want to definitely mention that there are geographical differences. I mean, this is why we are also analyzing different type of data that we gather within the SIGI framework in different regions. Currently, we're working a lot on Africa and even at the sub-regional level, because the norms do differ depending on where you are, actually. So some of the norms that I've mentioned on the acceptance level of violence, we do have lower acceptance, obviously, let's say in the North Americas, whereas you still have half of the population in Africa do accept such violent acts. Another topic is obviously this, whether people actually think men make better leaders than women. I think we don't know. I mean, we know this is actually the pervasive social norms that we do have, but obviously it also differs region to region. For instance, 70% of population actually believe that in Africa, while this belief is much lower, for instance, in Europe, let's say, but still significant. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Then I have two questions. The first one for Stefan Verhulst and then for Papasek. So first, Stefan, you talked about your contacts with several national governments. Can you tell us more about the questions those governments are themselves concerning non-traditional data sets that are privately held, and how you tackle those questions? What arguments can you bring? You said that there is a business case, but can you tell us a little bit more about the different contacts you have with governments about these non-traditional data sets. And then the second question for Papasek. Papasek, there is a question regarding the dissemination of data sets for the marginalized group. How does UN Women develop the action plan for collecting the frequent data? I'll give first the floor to Stefan, and then I come back to you.
And again, I'm sensitive to the time. You want me not to spend an hour on sharing some of the experiences here, but I think just some top level kind of takeaways is that one, as it relates to questions, our overall experience is that most policymakers, and again, I'm not gonna call names, are actually not good in formulating questions. Meaning they are trained quite often in thinking in terms of solutions, and quite often enter the ecosystem from a solution perspective, not from, anyway, what is actually the kind of insights that we need before we immediately start thinking about solutions. And I think having a mind shift where you have the permission, because it's also quite often an incentive structure, where you have the permission to ask questions, would make a big difference with regard to the use of data and the potential of data for actually policy making. Second concern that we see is that quite often when you have a question, then you actually, as a policymaker, also need to start thinking about what can I actually do if I have the insight? Because too often what we see is that data collaboratives are being generated. A lot of effort goes into generating the insight that seeks to answer a particular question or solve or provide better insight for a problem. And then there is no action attached to it because no one really had thought through what is it that we're going to do once we have the insight. And so really thinking about data from an end-to-end perspective. What's the question? What's the data we need? How do we get the insight? And what will we do when we have the insight is really the kind of sophistication that we need to bring to the table in order to actually really start using non-traditional, but also in most cases, traditional data to improve policymaking.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Stefan. One more question. Could you share with us two, three names of countries which are particularly advanced in the use of non-traditional data? Or
that's a typical question, Sylvie, that I typically actually refuse to answer.
Okay.
Mainly because everyone struggles, right? Obviously, there are a few that have more experimentation, quite often because they have better and more resources, or because the culture is different. But I think I have not met a single country that is not struggling with this. But we are making on a day-by-day progress, and I think we're from looking back from when we started to where we are now, we made tremendous progress in a variety of areas.
Okay, thank you very much. Then there is also, before I give the floor to Papasek, I have also a question for Aishat Shahuda. Someone would like to know, Aishat, what are the biggest issues faced by your office during the COVID-19 pandemic? So if you can come up a little bit later on with elements of answer, but I would like first to give the floor to Papasek about what UN Women is doing in order to develop the action plan for collecting the frequent data. You have the floor, Papa.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. So I've actually addressed the question in the chat just to explain a little bit more the process that we use and how we work with national statistical offices to basically address action plans and really plan out the collection of data. So I won't repeat that, but one thing that I would say and link to, I think, another question that was there is how we are building on these lessons in the second phase of Women Count. So in this next phase, which will start in January of this year, so it's from January 2022 until December 2025, we will support, again, we've received a lot of demand from countries. Over 70 countries have demanded support from UN Women. But one thing that we are really doing, and it's in line with what I said earlier, is shifting the focus on, more on data use. So really understanding, even before we start collecting data, understanding already, what are the intended uses of this data. So really having conversation with all stakeholders, particularly with policymakers, to ensure that they are in the process from the beginning, so that data use becomes really the primary objective rather than data collection. And this is, I think, one of the key lessons that we learned from the first phase of the program. It's really, I think, one approach that we think will be helpful in terms of fostering demand for useful data, but also improving the use of it.
Thank you very much, Papa. We are already coming to the end of this enriching session. We have the chance to see from different perspectives how gender statistics play a key role in policy making and thus towards gender equality. Not all questions were answered. We have heard from Stefan that we cannot have answered to all questions, but it doesn't matter. And I would like really to thank the experts for their engaging interventions, as well as all participants for their relevant questions and comments. Before I go to the end and I give the floor to UNSD, I noted that I forgot to give the floor again to Aishat. Sorry, Aishat, you have the floor. For the last question I asked you, and it was about the specific challenges you have faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. So sorry, I just skipped you. So you have the floor.
Challenge was because we could not do the face-to-face surveys that we have. So at the time of the COVID, we were in the midst of the household income and expenditure survey. So these things had to be cut short, and we had to shift to other modes of data collection, like phone surveys and web-based surveys. So this is a huge shift technologically that, but fortunately we were able to start these initiatives. So we have done phone surveys for the informal sector, also how the COVID impacted the households. I think, and the capacity issues and the difficulties, the administrative data systems that are already available are not in a good quality to be used for statistical purposes. So the need to invest in these is also something that was highlighted. Thank you.
Much, Aishat. So now we really come to the end of this panel, and I would like to thank you all for your engaging interventions, as well also as the participants for their questions and comments. There were a lot of them, a lot of questions, comments, and also very interesting material in the chat box. So I recommend you that you have a look at them, because you will have there also a lot of very interesting information. Before ending this question, the United Nations Statistics Division would like to give you a few information on the follow-up of this session. So thank you to all of you. I won't take the floor again. I will give the floor to Francesca. So I would like really to thank all of you for all the information you gave us, and also for your commitment towards gender statistics. Thank you very much. And I give the floor to Francesca.
Thank you so much. Excellent job, Sylvie. And thanks again to all the panelists. We took a lot of notes, and we promise that we'll make a fair summary that we'll bring back at the end of the forum tomorrow. But also will bring to the World Data Forum, because the outcome of this session and the other 5 sessions of the Forum on Gender Statistics will be reported back, will be shared with the World Data Forum next week. So that's something we are also excited about. And then the outcome of this event will also be reported back to the UN Statistical Commission in March 2022. So a lot to look forward. I have again taken note of all your important points. I'm not going to summarize them here, but maybe just a couple of takeaways or keywords. The importance of filling in gender data gaps. We discussed a lot about improving the data availability on attitudes toward gender norms. And of course, we want to have more data for more countries, but we also want data that are regularly produced so that we can really measure progress over time. We touched on the importance of timely gender data, particularly during the COVID crisis. That's something that really came up as a must-have. So that's another element of quality that we want to promote, timeliness. We also touched on the importance of assessing what is available at the country level. I think that our colleague Shawuda made the case for that very strongly. First, start with the baseline, what is available, work closely with all your stakeholders at the country level. Remember that there are already 2 frameworks that have been agreed in terms of indicators that could guide you, both the SDGs and the minimum set of gender indicators. And then again, working collaboratively, make sure that the final goal is to come up with a gender perspective that is integrated across the national statistical system. Also, the point on starting to work with privately held data. I think those data are there, and we need to make sure that we work much more closely with these additional actors in our data ecosystem. I believe that Stefan gave us the recipe to start working with them more closely. Of course, we need to establish strong collaboratives or partnerships, but also what is fundamental is for us as a community to highlight what are the key questions, what are the key policy questions, what are the key research questions that we want the data to respond to. Of course, Papa's intervention, we cannot move on and improve if we don't have solid financial and human resources. I love that the angle should be that we need to come into the discussion by prioritizing and making the case for the use of data. So it's not just about talking among ourselves as the producers, it's all about making the case and showing the value of our work to secure sustainable financing, sustainable resources, and really to establish gender statistics programs or even systems. I'm gonna stop here. I already told you that we'll bring the outcomes of this important discussion to the World Data Forum next week and to the Statistical Commission in March. I'm gonna say goodbye for now. Session 1 is closed, and we will resume our discussion this afternoon at 2 p.m. New York time with another interesting session where we will talk about the value of time, measuring gender equality through data on time use. So I look forward to seeing you virtually again in a few hours. Thank you so much, and thank you to our fantastic panelists and moderator.